Thank you, John. This is a very interesting and enjoyable debate. It reminds me, though, of Mark Levinson's fantastic book that was titled "The Great A and P and the Struggle for Small Business." Those of us who read history can remember A and P was the Amazon of the day. It was a big retail chain, and there was exactly the same discussion going on back in the 30s against it. There were actually laws that states passed that made it illegal for them to sell at a discount. There were laws passed that taxed them at a higher rate. Even Governor Huey Long of Louisiana famously stated, "I'd rather have thieves and gangsters than chain stores in Louisiana." And so when you look at this, the same thing is going on today. As Mike and I wrote in our book, Big is Beautiful, uh, Amazon and other big retailers, they pay 30% more than small retailers. Large companies pay 25% more in retirement benefits. They employ more women and minorities. They have way fewer injuries to their workers. They have way fewer layoffs. They have more patents, more R&D. So, and the other thing, if we look at it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, retail productivity in the last decade, while Amazon and other online sellers were growing, grew 10% faster than the previous decade. So there are 1 million retailers in the country, there are 10 million retail workers, and there's 263 million online consumers. So my question to Stacy and Rana is, why should public policy favor the 1 million small capitalists over the workers and consumers who are clearly better off with Amazon? The workers are better off because they get paid more, and the consumers are better off because they get better prices and certainly much more convenience. Save, as Mike Mandel said, 200 million, tens of millions of hours a month on that they don't have to travel. So why are we even caring about this notion? Why can't we let the market work?
Well, I mean, Rob, as you know, I've written a review of your book that takes disputes the factual basis for a number of those claims about small business, and I think we live in an economy that really, I think, shows this. And there is lots of economics research that points to the fact that as we have seen greater consolidation, we've also seen a widening gap in income, growing numbers of people who are struggling to get by, more concentrated wealth at the top. We have seen huge challenges to our democracy because of concentrated corporate power. We see large swaths of the country where the geographic divide between a handful of metros that are booming versus second tier cities and rural areas that are really struggling because the scale of our economy, when you concentrate business in a handful of companies, you naturally concentrate wealth, you concentrate the geographic distribution of opportunity. I think these forces are tearing our country apart. I think they're incredibly problematic. I think we would be better off with having stronger, more robust local economies, and that means more entrepreneurship, which we've seen a huge decline in, more innovation, and that kind of thing. And I particularly want to take up the A&P point because that's a piece of history that I do think is incredibly instructive. A&P used many of the same kinds of tactics that we see Amazon using, predatory tactics in terms of engaging in aggressive buyer power, in terms of being incredibly anti-union. I mean, A&P shut down 200 stores in Cleveland back in the 40s because workers were beginning to organize. They took a very aggressive stance against small grocers in very predatory ways, and the government stepped in and went after them in a series of antitrust cases. And the result of that was that A&P had to spin off parts of its operation, that A&P had to start operating more in a fair kind of way, couldn't simply use its size and power, that they began to recognize the right of workers to form unions. And you look at the grocery sector in the 1950s and 60s, and what you see is a sector that has flourishing numbers of small businesses, rising rates of unionization, and a bustling middle class. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to do now with regard to Amazon.
I would just amplify a lot of what Stacy just said. Let me take up the point that Rob makes, and it's a good point to explore about R&D spending. Because it's true, if you look not just at Amazon, but if you look at the big five in general, they do spend more on R&D than other companies and other companies in the field. But I would argue that that's actually a result of the fact that they are such enormous monopolies of a kind that we've never before seen, because they are able to monetize user data. And in the case of Amazon, users meaning both buyers, but also the small businesses that are on the platform, in ways that are completely asymmetrical. That's the whole business model. And I'll mention again the book, which anybody that's interested in this topic has to read, which is Hal Varian's Information Rules. It basically sets out the roadmap for becoming a monopoly knowingly. Now, this is all changing. I mean, regulators are piecing apart why this is unfair, why this is potentially illegal. I mean, you're seeing the European Union with its Digital Services Act already saying, look, you should have financial disclosures about this data. They don't even have to report it on SEC statements, for example, the way they would if it was another kind of asset. So they can just get bigger and bigger and bigger under the radar. I think that we're about to see a tidal wave of regulation that really explodes these ideas and helps people to understand the fact that free is not free.